subscribe, and click the notification bell to join a group of the most amazing people in the world, the Notification Squad. National and state parks are realms dominated by nature and often mystery, protected by our government. Sometimes the best choice is to stay away, but if you can't, bring a flashlight, bring your friend, so that when you're taken, you can see it coming and you don't have to be alone. These are 10 allegedly true scary stories from national and state parks. If you want your story featured in an episode of Darkness Prevails, share it with us at darknessprevails.org. I'm looking for scary stories from India and creepy experiences from police, firefighters, and other first responders. One Full Moon Night from Devil's Bartender. Location unknown. A year ago, I was working the bar at a bar and grill my family owns in a small town. Our town has thrived because of the beautiful state park that attracts a lot of tourism. It was the middle of summer, and the bar was nearly filled with tourists in their 20s, both men and women, who were looking for something to do late at night after the Rangers kicked everyone who wasn't staying in the park out until dawn. Every one of those guys wanted to tell the cute brunette behind the bar how they did something in the park that they thought was impressive. Unfortunately, I was that girl behind the bar, having to act like they were the first to tell me that they had climbed to the peak of something or had gotten this massive fish in the lake. When closing time came around, Tyler, the bar's security, helped me get everyone out except these 2 drunks who were waiting on their driver, who was in the bathroom. Tyler is a huge man, built like a lineman, so I felt safe sending the rest of the employees home as I finished cleaning the bar. The 2 drunks seemed normal enough at the time. They were mostly talking to themselves or laughing, or talking to Tyler about the last game they saw on TV. The point is, they didn't seem that drunk, but they were responsible enough not to insist that they drive themselves home. So the only weird part about them is they seemed too responsible to go out drinking until 2:30 in the morning. Finally, the driver came out of the bathroom and walked up to me and asked if his buddies owed anything on taps, but they didn't. But I wanted to hurry up and go home, so I finished up and I wished them a good night, and I began to walk the gentlemen to the door. After they were out, I jokingly shook my head at Tyler and he smirked. "Ready to go, ma'am?" Tyler asked, calling me ma'am knowing it annoys me. "Not yet. I need to take the money out of the register, then we're all done." As I opened the register, the 2 drunks barged back in, pushing themselves against the door as something slammed against it. I looked over to Tyler as he looked at me. "Guys, it's time to leave," Tyler said, beginning to walk over to them. "Call 911!" One of them yelled out, still leaning against the door. The other ran to a window and began to look around outside frantically. "What happened? Where's your driver?" I asked. "Something attacked him," the man at the door yelled. I was trying to figure out what they were talking about when I noticed the one looking out the window had red stains on his shirt. They weren't there before. I ran across the bar to where the phone was and dialed 911. The operator greeted me with a somewhat cheerful tone. This was my first time calling the police like this. It was usually passed out drunks or a small bar fight. I struggled to find the words. This is Alexa at the bar. There's a few guys here that say their friend got attacked. They're insisting that who attacked them is still outside." I must have sounded frantic, because the operator was telling me to calm down and that the police and ambulance would be on its way. After I hung up, I looked at Tyler, and I wasn't sure what to do next. "We've got 3 minutes," I told them. My father made all of his employees, especially his daughters, remember how long emergency responses would usually take from the second you hung up. Tyler went to start calming everyone down, when he heard something strange coming from outside, just by the door. From the way it sounded, I thought it was a bear or a large dog growling. "What in the world was that?" Tyler asked, all of us looking at the door. A few seconds later, sirens could be heard. The police were banging on the door, but the man didn't move. Tyler went to move him out of the way to let the police inside, but the guy pushed him back, which was quite the feat considering Tyler's size. Tyler shoved back, managing to get the guy away from the door. The police rushed in to assess the situation, seeing Tyler basically fighting to hold on to the frantic man. The police restrained him. The sheriff walked in. He's a close family friend, so I was very happy to see him. He asked me what was going on exactly, so I told him as much as I knew, which wasn't much. He said they found the third man outside. He was fine, but had a huge gash. He pointed to his young deputy and told me to show him the security cameras to see what they caught, as he took statements from everyone else. I knew the deputy as a youngish man. He was a year older than me, but he was new to the area and still very much green behind the ears. We went to the back office and I pulled up some footage from outside. The cameras covered the parking lot, but there was a blind spot if you were up against the building. We watched as the men went out to their car, and one of them began to point to the corner of the building, just under one of these cameras, out of sight. Then something quick ran out at them. It looked like a tall and thin man running around on all fours. He jumped on the driver. The two men then ran in the bar, and it turned to look at them, so we saw its face then. It looked like a man wearing a mask, but nothing else. It ran after them. "That's what slammed against our door," I said, dumbfounded. "What in the world is that?" The deputy asked. He walked over to the door and called the sheriff into the room, insisting he needed to watch this. The sheriff came in and watched the security footage. He didn't look shocked, but he did look confused. "What is it?" He began to stand up and looked at me, put a hand on my shoulder and told me to call everyone that I thought needed to know what happened. I called my father, but the phone went straight to voicemail. So I called my sister, who said she was coming over immediately with Arthur. I also called the opening crew, who would be coming in a few hours, to give this place a deep clean before prepping for the lunch crew. I told them to be careful and to not rush over. I finished my duties and realized it was already 4 a.m. My sister scared me as she rushed in and hugged me, thankful that I was okay. All she knew was a patron got attacked in the parking lot, and the attacker tried to get in. Arthur got called over to the sheriff, who wanted to talk to him. He's a forest ranger who works at the state park nearby, so I was confused on why he wanted to talk to him. My sister was being your standard older sister and was asking if I was hurt, looking me over for scratches and injuries, like I had fallen off a bike. She asked me if anyone else had gotten hurt, and that's when I realized that I sent the employees, my friends, home only minutes before that thing attacked. But I didn't think about that for long before the conversation between Arthur and the sheriff got our attention. "But what do you think he's doing here?" Arthur said a little too loud. He looked around to see everyone looking at them. The sheriff motioned Arthur to turn their backs to everyone and quietly continued their conversation. My sister asked me what I wasn't telling her, and I told her that some sort of animal or person had attacked the poor man. After a while, the police had gotten everything they needed from me and allowed me to go home, which of course my sister insisted she drive me. I really didn't want her attention on me anymore, and Arthur agreed, saying that he would drive me home instead in my car, and that my sister could follow us in theirs. On the way back, we were mostly quiet, when Arthur spoke up. Did it see you?" he asked, sounding very concerned. "What?" I asked, confused. "I mean, did you see it?" He rephrased his question. "No, I didn't. Why?" It's nothing," he said, turning into my driveway. "Arthur, what was that thing?" I asked him. "How do you know about it?" He looked at me with genuine care in his eyes. "You've had a rough night," he said. "I'll see if I can explain things to you another time." He never did. But that partly is because after that day, I never asked him about it. It wasn't the last thing I saw out there near the state park that I couldn't explain. There's something up with this place. I don't think the weirdness is going to stop. The Forest of Romans, from Gill. Location: Loch Lomond National Park in Scotland. This story takes place last year in the final days of the summer holidays at a national park in Scotland known as Loch Lomond. I had been staying with my cousin for a week before we had to go back to school. We'd spent that week, for the most part at least, pretty non-eventfully. We stayed up watching scary movies, went out with my cousin's friends, and generally just tried to have some fun. However, there was an experience I had during this week which stands out as just plain unsettling. Not unsettling in a sinister, malevolent way. It's just, I truly can't explain it, but I will try my best. As I was saying, I was down staying with my cousins who also lived with my aunt and uncle. They lived on the outskirts of Glasgow and never really got to see much in the way of wilderness or nature. So we had all decided to go for a trek in the Loch Lomond National Park, which is around 25 miles north of Glasgow. It was a fine day for it. The temperature would have been around 20 degrees Celsius. There was a distinct warm breeze in the air, and the loch was completely flat calm. After a while, my cousin, Dan, grew tired of wandering about the forest we had found ourselves in, and asked if we could go off and explore a bit. I was 17 and Dan was 15. We were told we were allowed as long as we didn't wander too far. But as bored teenagers do, we completely disregarded this advice and ran off deep into the forest. It was quite dark in there, as the leaves of the trees were that dense. Not much sunlight could penetrate the forest canopy. We saw a few deer running through the trees in the distance, and Dan at one point swore he saw a wildcat scaling a tree, which I deemed unlikely. As it soon turned out, however, there were weirder things to be sighted in this forest than wildcats. We eventually came to a clearing, and Dan stopped just before we got into it for a number 1. So I continued on past the tree line into the bright clearing. It was very beautiful. There were loads of wild plants like foxgloves, and there were bees buzzing around. But this is when things get very strange. As I looked about the clearing, the form of another person caught my eye from the other side. As I squinted to see the shadowy figure, which was stood just beyond the trees, I could instantly tell there was something weird about them. I took a few steps toward the figure, but they showed no signs of life. That's when I noticed what they were wearing. It seemed to be a metal helmet and armor over some ripped red-colored undergarments. One of the figure's hands was placed on something on his belt, which I perceived as being the hilt of some kind of short sword. "That's a freaking Roman," I murmured aloud to myself. I'd studied history at school. Of course, the Roman Empire had been one of our topics. That was definitely Roman armor, and that seemed to be a Roman gladius sword at his hip. That was the last thing I expected to see in the woods. "What are you staring at?" A voice from behind me jolted me back from my thoughts. Dan was coming up from behind me. "Dude, there's some weirdo over there, dressed up as a Roman, just standing over there, look." I froze. When I turned and pointed, the guy had vanished. Odd, I thought to myself. I began to walk quickly to the trees where I'd seen him to see if he had hid from our view. But he was completely gone, not even a trace of him. "So, where's this dodgy Roman at, Gill?" my cousin asked me mockingly. I gave him a bit of abuse before we continued on adventuring. I convinced myself it was probably some group of people filming a project for college or school or something. They'd probably seen us and tried to prank us. I was beginning to push it to the back of my mind. We had come upon a very dark part of the forest. Dan and I were chatting about various things when I heard a loud, high-pitched sound coming from our right. We both froze. Dan had heard it too. We stopped and listened for a while. This was freaky, I thought. All the birds had stopped singing in response. The noise came again. Dan asked, "Is that metal?" The noise began to increase in volume and frequency. Dan was right. It sounded like swords clashing together. By the sounds of it, there was an entire army waging war within the depths of the forest. I was beginning to think I was right about that Roman figure being part of a film group, when suddenly a guttural scream of pain split through the trees, and then there was silence. "What the hell?" Dan said. But he was interrupted when a dark figure stepped out from behind a tree about 20 meters away. This figure was also clad in the same Roman armor as the man I'd seen earlier. It was another Roman, or maybe it was the same one, I don't know. The only difference seemed to be a very noticeable huge cut down his center. Dan and I were frozen by the sight of this figure. Before we could make a move, another figure stepped out from a tree behind the first. This one was missing his left arm and held a javelin in his right. His armor hung off of him raggedly. We could see more shadowy figures in the distance beyond these two, all of them horrifically injured. That was when we both finally remembered how to move. We both turned to run, and as we did, we caught sight of one final figure separate from the rest. This one wore a gallia, the classic bristled Roman helmet, which marked him as a senior officer, a centurion. But he had not escaped injury either. There was some kind of axe buried in his chest piece. He was hunched over in pain. That was enough for Dan and I. We ran back the way we'd came as fast as we could. Though I can't say for sure, I swear I heard the centurion calling out to us. It had sounded like he told us to flee, and that chills me to this day. Once we had eventually found our way back to the car, back to my aunt and uncle, we were given the standard lecture about ignoring instructions and how we could have been missing and all that. But we didn't care. Instead, we tried to tell them about the Romans, but they would not have it. They thought we were making it all up. After I got home, I decided to research the area around that forest and found information about the Roman 9th Legion, or Lost Legion as they had come to be known after the entire 6,000-strong army up and vanished after being sent north into Scotland, trying to quell a rebellion. The natives that were wildly considered to be responsible for wiping out the Romans all lived near Loch Lomond, and so likely ambushed the Legion, as they knew the land, the forests, well. So what do you think? Was this an elaborate prank just for two young kids? Or was this something beyond natural? Wolf creature. From A and Remy. Location, Colorado. This happened about 2 years ago in the Uncompahgre National Forest near my home. I had my 7-year-old Labrador Retriever with me while I was hiking on this particular evening in late August. I was going through a hard time and went hiking a lot to clear my head during that time. I had been hiking for about 4 hours without seeing anything but a few chipmunks and a black bear. My lab was trotting beside me happily, excited just to be outside, when we decided to stop along the canyon ridge for some water and some dinner that I had packed for the two of us. His was a can of dog food, but I had made myself a nice spread of cheese, crackers, a turkey sandwich, and some apple juice. When we had finished with our dinner, I began to tell him what I was thinking about, like problems with friends, as I had a rough time in high school, and my lab was my closest friend. "Come on, old pal," I said to him. "Let's head back to the car." He leapt up happily and began to trot beside me. We didn't make it a mile before a feeling washed over me. I was being watched. By what, I thought. There wouldn't be anyone out here for miles, I reminded myself. That's when my lab's ears perked up. He began a low growl. "Remy, boy, what's the matter?" The fur stood up on his whole back, the way he does when he's angry or scared. He started to run, and I chased after him, calling and calling. He never ever disobeyed a callback, so this worried me. I then began to hear heavy footsteps running from his barking. He was chasing something. "Remington, get back here," I yelled after him. When I finally caught up with him, the mutt had every single fur standing on end, teeth bared, and growling at a large dog. Sure, he would give chase to creatures all the time, but never had he been so aggressive before. I looked at the larger dog after I put Remy back on his leash. It wasn't a normal dog. This one was huge, with dark fur and a single silver spot over its eye. I immediately thought wolf. Its legs were muscular, the muzzle covered in dried red. The head was up to my chin on all fours, and the creature had red glaring eyes. I slowly began to back away from the wolf, saying, "It's okay," to it. "I'm not here to hurt you. We're going now." The animal took a step towards us. My eyes went wide as saucers. Remy growled and jumped from his leash at the wolf, catching me off guard. That's when I felt more disturbed than ever. Startled, the wolf-like creature stood up on hind legs. Muscles that I could see better now rippled and flexed. Its legs looked human almost, and the chest was like a grown man's, covered in hair. The thing bared its teeth and looked directly at me. Remy cowered behind me, now whining and whimpering. We were both terrified. The creature towered over us and snapped its teeth at me. It began to sniff me and Remy, circling us slowly. I couldn't move at all, even when the creature touched its muzzle to my back, sniffing at me. The creature began to wail, rearing its head back. I remember thinking that these are my final moments. Maybe it's calling others to help eat me. I looked down at my terrified dog. We reached an agreement. I shoved at the creature as hard as I could, causing it to fall over, which is easier for things on two legs, and we ran. I ran like I would never see tomorrow, and Remy kept pace with me. "Come on, buddy," I said to him. I could feel the heavy footsteps of that animal behind me. I pushed and ran faster, faster. I made it to the road and looked back. That was a big mistake. The creature was no more than 10 feet behind us, sprinting at full speed. That's when I hear it, a truck, a large semi, coming towards us on the road. I kept running until I saw it. Then I turned again. The creature was now gone, probably scared from the sound of the loud machinery. I ran until we reached the car and I threw the backpack in. Remy jumped inside. We thundered down the road at about 45 miles an hour. Any faster and we surely would have crashed. There was a horrible howling sound booming from the forest, and the creature returned in the rearview mirror, pursuing us again. I couldn't go any faster. We cracked around curves and hit potholes. I thanked God my car was high-rise. It was only 3 feet behind us at one point. I could hear the pause over the engine. That's when we hit the pavement instead of dirt. I sped up to 60 miles an hour. We lost the creature, and I continued down the road back to my house. When we finally made it there, we got inside, both of us shaking. My parents asked what had happened. I told them that we were chased by a bear. It wasn't entirely false, as we did see a black bear, and we were chased by something. Remy and I eventually calmed down enough to go to sleep. I woke up at 2 a.m. because I had to use the bathroom. I began to get out of bed when I heard a familiar growl outside my window. Oh God, I thought. I heard footsteps and a ripping sound, as if there were claws sliding down the siding of the house. I was terrified, but Remy stayed silent, shaking like he had been before. I slid out of bed, and I walked to the door, keeping an eye on my window the entire time. The growl deepened, and eventually the creature roared, pounding 3 times on the wall. I screamed and ran into the living room, waking my family. My dad grabbed a 12 gauge and ran outside, but the creature was gone. But there were remnants of it, because the siding on the side of the house had deep scratches on it, 2 feet to the right of my bedroom window. I've since moved out from my parents' place. Remy and I don't go hiking in the Uncompahgre anymore, and I've never seen the creature again. Some part of me does want to go back, try to see it again, but I know better than that, so I steer clear of those woods. If you're ever in the Uncompahgre, beware of the Spring Creek trails. I saw him again. From J. Location: Georgia. I grew up in a small town in rural Georgia. There are 2 schools here, one private and one public. I went to the private school until middle school, then switched to the public school in an attempt to get scouted by a college to play football. After I graduated, the football thing didn't work out, and I left for college. I had to come back home after my freshman year for typical reasons: partying too much, not paying attention in class, etc. When I came back home in 2012, I moved into a remodeled trailer on family land, got a job, and enrolled at a community college in the neighboring large city in my hometown. It was about 30 minutes away. I had gotten into legal trouble since my return, and I wanted to quit drinking and smoking. One late night or early morning, my friends all left my place, and I was restless due to the no drinking or smoking thing. I had trouble sleeping, so I said, screw this. I got into my car and took off to the gas station. It was about 10 minutes away from my house. I needed to buy a pack of smokes. It was about 12 or 1 in the morning, and as I was coming around a curve, I see flames on the side of the road. There was an incredibly large fire there. The flames engulfed what appeared to be a car flipped upside down. I slowed down, going from 55 or 60 to about 10 in the matter of 2 seconds. I pulled up beside the wreckage when I noticed something else. Is that a man? I asked myself in disbelief. A burned up carcass of a man was outside of the car closest to the road. He was burned into nothing but a black crisp. He was on his back with one of his legs cut from the kneecap down. The other leg still had its foot, but it was burned so bad it didn't matter. His arms were charred so bad that they appeared to have missing fingers, and his hands had been burned down into smaller versions of themselves. His left arm was extended into the air, as if he had been reaching out for help or something else. I guess the fire had burned it into place, where it just stuck out like that. The other arm was extending partially up, but not nearly as high as the other arm. I was in disbelief. How had anyone not heard or seen this? There were houses in the neighborhood nearby. I wondered, am I the first person to see this incident? I exited my car and called the police. After I got off the phone with them, I wandered around the scattered wreckage, and I actually found his ID. I knew the guy. He was 7 years older than me, and he had attended the private school that I attended until middle school. It was a long night, needless to say. I was there for 3 more hours talking with police. I got my pack of smokes, then went home. In 2015, I was at the Nantahala National Forest. My buddies and I were camping, getting ready for our usual summer fun of whitewater kayaking on the Chattooga River. I was the last one up that night, smoking my last cigarette before bedtime. It had been almost 3 years to the date of the incident. I had put it in the back of my mind, but soon it would be all I could think about. Suddenly, I heard something off into the woods to my right. When I looked up, I felt very strange about it. I'm not the type of person to ignore these feelings either, so instead of brushing it off, I shone my flashlight in the direction of the noise. What I see knocks me right out of my chair. It's him, I think. The man I had found on the side of the road, burned into a charred mess. He was standing, looking right at me. He had no eyes. He was exactly as I had found him, in fact. 1.5 legs, messed up fingers, screwed up hands, the exact same. I was shocked into paralysis. He lifts his burned arm up and points it right at me. I finally come out of my paralysis and stand up, grabbing my Bowie knife. I ask in a soft voice, and I call him by name. "What do you want from me?" I wasn't expecting a reply, but he did. He said, "Look behind you." I turn around, and when I do, I'm looking straight at a bobcat, maybe 5 or 10 feet away from me, right beside my tent. I pull my knife, and I call to my friends as loudly as possible. Then I get into an athletic position, just in case this bobcat jumps at me. Scared now, it runs away. I turn back around and the man was gone. My friends get out and see the bobcat hightailing it out of there, and they ask, "Dude, how close did he get?" I said he was right on top of you guys. I really don't know why this happened. I'm not sure if that man ever truly left this earth. But today is almost the 6th year anniversary of his passing, and I can only wish him my thanks for possibly saving my life that day. I drove through a park that didn't exist. From Don't Tell Anyone. Location unknown. In 2009, I had a falling out with my parents. I was 17 at the time and still very much depended on them. After coming out as gay to them, I was kicked out of the house and sent packing on my own. You might be saying I should have notified the police of this, as I was underage, but the last thing I wanted to do was stretch out that drama any longer than it needed to be. If that's how they were, then who cares if they'd raised me? I deserved to be happy. I took odd job after odd job, gathering enough cash to stay in motels across the Midwest, and eventually purchasing an old Ford Focus, filling the trunk with hiking and camping equipment. I found myself drawn to state and national parks, spending my time hiking and sometimes even meeting new people along the trails. This was my life now. Camp, hike, drive, and when money got scarce, hire myself out to people in need. I was a bit of a wizard with pre-modern cars before things got to advance under the hood, so I was more often than not a freelance mechanic. In May of the following year, which would be 2010. I was driving through rural Indiana. I had spent the day hiking through some mountains. I was tired and wanted to get out of this national park and on to the next one before I was ready to sleep. It was then, without warning, when things turned into a nightmare. First, it started with the stars. Out here, there was hardly any light pollution. I remember before night even peaked, I could see a multitude of stars in the sky. But one moment, they were there in all their glory, and the next, I looked up through the windshield, and the sky was solid black. I mean, it was so black, it was more like a giant black continent had blotted out the sky above me. I tried to find the moon to reassure myself, but it had vanished along with those stars, despite there being a decently bright half moon that night. This wasn't creepy, but it was a head-scratcher. It was so dark that I could no longer see outside my side windows. All I had in the way of light were my headlights and a flashlight in the back seat. When I saw a familiar green square on the side of the road, I slowed my car down to get a closer look. I could not angle my headlights right to see the entire text of the road sign well, so I had to step out with my flashlight. If I wasn't creeped out yet, I was after reading that bizarre sign. The white plain letters read, "You're now leaving Feld Fields National Park. Caution." Feld Fields, huh? I've never heard of this park before, and I was almost certain a park of that name did not exist anywhere in the Midwest. And what was with the caution part? Confused and ready to leave, I turned back to my car, shining the road with my flashlight. I couldn't breathe for a moment. My car was gone. How was that possible? The headlights had been on, shining half the sign for me to read. I would have noticed it disappearing in this absolute darkness. I began to panic, shining the flashlight left, then right, then left again. This couldn't be happening, I told myself. This wasn't real. It had to be a dream. Maybe I'd fallen asleep on the road and I needed to wake up. Unfortunately, I was already awake inside a nightmare. I didn't know what to do besides to continue walking. I continued the way I'd been going, past the sign on the side of the road. I kept an eye on the trees on either side, occasionally shining them with the torch. I swear I kept seeing a silhouette standing there that would move just out of sight when I'd peer in that direction. Maybe I was going crazy. Maybe I wasn't. I began running at that point, my heart racing and trying to throw itself out of my chest. As I was shining my light to the sides of the road, I ran into something hard. It knocked the air out of me and left me with a broken knuckle. I shone my flashlight ahead of me quickly, sure that I was going to see a creature or person ready to end me in this dreadful darkness. But it was just my car. I stood up. There ahead of my car, just as I'd left it, was the sign that I passed a half hour ago. I didn't waste a second as I climbed into my still running Ford Focus and stepped on the gas pedal. I drove for, and I'm not exaggerating here, about 3 hours. Only after those 3 hours did the stars finally fade into view. The moon revealed itself, and I passed that dang sign one last time. It was over. The most confusing and panicky event in my life. The event that made me wary of driving and hiking for a very long time. And I ended up getting a stable job in an apartment in a small town in Minnesota, too. That's my story. There's no explanation. I've yet to find anything online or physically of Feld Fields, and I will never forget the fear I felt. What happens at national and state parks should stay at the national and state parks. Because if they don't, do you want that kind of horror finding its way home to you? People disappear and are taken from national forests every day. And unless you really want to disappear into an unknown fate, I advise you to stay away or stay prepared. At this point, I might just superglue a GPS into the back of my head. Good night. Be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe if you enjoyed this episode. Don't forget to share your stories at darknessprevails.org for a chance to have it featured in a future episode of Darkness Prevails. I'm looking for stories from India and tales from first responders. If you want to support my show, you can go to patreon.com/darknessprevails. My patrons get access to ad-free episodes that they can download as MP3s, or go to teespring.com/stores/darknessprevails. Or if you're on YouTube, click the shop button below to check out my merchandise in time for the holiday season. Now, as usual, here are 5 of my favorite early comments from the previous video about 7 creepy cabin stories. Danielle Lakic says, I've been waiting for this video for like 2 hours, even though I wake up in 3. Absolutely love this theme. Well, with all that lack of sleep, what you need is a restful stay in a haunted cabin in the woods. Patrick Gaylord says, first comment, that's my first. Can I be in your next video at the part with the favorite comments? Almost, Patrick. You were a second comment this time around. But I'll still feature you because I feel bad. Enjoy. Alberto Alvarez says, oh yes, time to have nightmares. Ah, that's life for you. Oh, you meant the video and not waking up every day. My bad. The Weirdo Project says, I got stood up tonight, but you never fail me, Darkness. Well, that's heartbreaking. I'm sorry that happened. These stories will always be here for you, and I hope that never happens again, because that's pretty sucky for anybody. And Horror Fan says, love your videos. They help me with stress and make my day better. Thank you. Spooky stories strangely do the same for me, and on long drives that's my favorite thing to do. Scary stories nonstop. Well, that brings us to the end of this episode. But don't you get too worried because more scary stories are coming soon, so stay tuned. Until next time, here are the credits to my amazing patrons who continue to donate. Remember, stay safe out there and stay creepy, because this world is a strange one.